Everyone loves a good protagonist, but sometimes you have to take a step back to realise that something has gone wrong. G'day mates and fellow adventurers, my name is Mordecai. There is a metric ton of appealing aspects to a long-term campaign. The rise of heroic protagonists as villains emerge from the world with their evil machinations, the exploration of a setting and its various factions, and you can't forget about the possibility of players pulling off awesome feats, such as forging their own kingdom as an example. However, there is always the potential for problems to emerge as the campaign progresses, and when one of these problems is a player suffering from main character syndrome, it can cause the entire game to collapse. But you know what's worse than just main character syndrome? How about main character syndrome that continues to evolve without being in check, throwing out the entire balance of the party as the campaign becomes less about a group of adventurers and more about this precious main character in a cooperative game. And naturally, it can always cause the campaign to go completely cactus, but perhaps not in the way that you might expect. Before we get started with the story for the video, if I get to 1000 subs before the end of 2023, I have plans to cover an RPG story which predates the subreddit and contains one of the most infamous characters in all of tabletop role-playing game history. Let's delve into the often terrifying world of r/RPGHorrorStories. Today's narrative is titled, I Explode a Main Character Syndrome PC, thus destroying the plot and ending the game? And is written by user Status Desk Job. So, hi, I'm new, and this will be my first real social media post. I was told to write this experience here since this was my real first horror story, and should share it with others that may have gone through the same thing. It isn't all bad though, since that guy had it blow up in his face in the end. This is the story about a railroad, the rest of the party being turned into pawns, and an explosive finale that results in the DM ending the campaign. To set the stage, I joined this gaming group essentially comprised of family and friends. There was about 5 of us players, but I'll only list the ones that are more important to the story. Me playing a Dragonborn Barbarian, Stabby as the Goblin Ranger, the DM as himself, and Protag, who was playing a human paladin. We've all played D&D before, but only Protag and myself are what I would call veterans of the game. I hadn't played an in-person game since 2020, so I was very excited to be a part of this one. The game starts off normally enough. We all introduce our PCs, and the party gets a rhythm going. I would honestly say the introduction sessions were great. Lots of roleplay, team bonding, etc. But it all changes when Paladin's backstory kicks in, and now he is some sort of chosen one of his holy order. We all don't think too much of it at first, but over time his story starts to overshadow everyone else. He's crowned the leader of our troop, had a story beat in all of our backstories, and important enemies who were described as near-death 5 rounds ago only go down on his turn. Some were even backstory villains that had nothing to do with him, yet it still seemed like they were catered for him to deal the final blow. Since we were playing in a setting largely comprised of humans as well, me and Stabby were often made to work harder or outright excluded from RP sessions and meetings with important NPCs. As the story progressed, we even had to pay more for potions and items unless Protag was with us. Only him, not any of the other players who were also playing a human character. Now, let me explain. I don't mind a setting that has these kinds of social dynamics in them. In fact, I find them interesting. I can understand if there are injustices in a D&D setting, since most DMs do this so the PCs can make a difference outside of combat scenarios as well. But since we were at the whims of Protag, and he was more focused on his own power creep, we never really got around to it. He would even use this world-building footnote against our characters later when he felt we were stepping out of line. I tried to just roll with it since I was getting an in-person game. Half the people here were my family, and I didn't want to ruin it by being a mope. I had already kind of checked out due to all the sidelining, but Stabby, my cousin, was getting sick of it. She starts being a bit more vocal about the favoritism. This may have provoked Protag to lean further into his own ego as he, you're kidding me, didn't appreciate her criticizing his character arc? Under most circumstances, this should be seen as an early warning sign that the group has arrived at the point where the party needs to have a discussion with Protag out of game to talk to him about the problems that he is creating in-game. You've literally got him turning into a main character that has to be in the spotlight at all times, even in other players' backstories, and it has gotten to the point where his presence is required in order for a few of the party members to be given a fair dink and fair go. But let's see where the story itself goes. It is a bit late, but now that we're here, I should mention that Protag is the friend of the DM, who is in turn a friend of my other cousin. So before this, half of us didn't really know him. It is my belief that Protag's behaviour only began to change after he had become more comfortable with us. So at this point it was a bit of a drag, but it was about to get a lot worse. You see, Protag got crowned as a king of the new nation he formed. Now, if everyone was a side character before, we were all pawns now. Barely any of us got any time to do anything significant outside of roles, as much of the RP was taken by Protag. The rest of the party had already given up on our backstories, which is the most depressing thing about this by far. We were nearing what I'd call the end boss of the mid-arc. The party had just dethroned an evil Wizard King, and Protag was doing his Protag screen time interrogations. Most of us were checked out, since it had been about 8 minutes of just the DM and Protag talking, when the DM suddenly made the Wizard King try and kill one of the other PCs. This was supposed to be an epic in-game moment, I presume, but it would wind up being the catalyst to bring about the campaign's end. One of us tried to counterspell. Nope, it's too high of a level, and they failed the roll. So we asked what the spell looks like, and it was described as something along the lines of, "You all know its power word kill, so what do you do?" Now we're all paying attention. The DM lets us roll initiative to try and roleplay our way out of this, like it was slow motion intervention. Stabby ends up rolling the highest. She aims an arrow and ends up killing the Wizard King. We all start to out-of-game celebrate because this was the first boss kill she'd gotten since forever ago, but Protag suddenly marches his paladin up to Stabby and says, "You fool." Now we're all shocked. Suddenly the Wizard King rises as a lich due to some magic stuff, and we all have to run away. Back at Protag's castle, the Protag is going off about how we royally screwed up his plan. It is then explained that he and DM had played a few one-on-one sessions without us, and that Protag had information the rest of us couldn't have possibly known about. He was also given an amulet that would allow him to imprison the soul of the Wizard King and gain new spells if he had delivered the killing blow. Stabby then says something like, "Big deal, it's not like you need any more power anyways." But that didn't sit well with Protag since his character was serious and deep, while her character was built off as a joke. By now his anger was starting to bleed into real life, and he and Stabby were starting to get a bit heated. Stabby, being the mature one, leaves the conversation in game. The awkward table atmosphere leads to the party all leaving the castle to do their own things, leaving me and Protag in his throne room by himself. I think, hey, maybe I can RP now to progress the story, and maybe get into Protag's head that he should have maybe told us about all these important notes. So I try to speak to him, but he is having a hard time calming down, and dials it hard into his roleplay. He calls us all useless and keeps on moping about his now missing power-up. I try again to reiterate that if this was so important, why didn't he tell us? And that's when he attacks me. Yup, just strikes my character saying something like, "I am the king. I owe you all nothing." The DM is a bit shocked, but allows it. I think it's just a one-off, but nope, he's taking his annoyance out on me. So I make my barbarian rage and try to flee, but he uses some magical stuff to lock the castle exits. The other players are trying to act now, but Protag says, "You all left. There is no way you know what is going on." I suggest we end the game here, but Protag forces DM to continue since he is having fun again. So I just keep running, locked in his castle as this overpowered chosen one chases me throughout his castle. I briefly think of just letting him kill me so I can drop the game, but then I remember something. A few sessions ago, we had stopped the band of pirates from blowing up a port. The Protag had taken all of their gunpowder in order to try to homebrew some new firearms for his army. I ran straight to the cellar and hoped he followed me. To play it up, I went really hard on the half hit points of my barbarian and said I go to the cellar to try and hide. It isn't long before Protag corners me in the cellar and starts to repeat this mantra he always uses whenever he kills a big bad. I use my turn to activate my Dragonborn's chromatic warding, telling him to back down in character one last time. He uses his turn to RP some random on-the-spot reasoning as to why his character is suddenly being so violent against mine, leaning heavily into the homebrew's settings views on the non-human species. Now, at the table, I'm pretty chill about this, so he thinks it's no big deal that he's going to kill my PC. He asks me if I'm ready to roll a new character, and even suggests what I should bring to blend in with his kingdom better. On his next turn, he attacks me. I'm barely alive due to Barbarian Rage at this point, but it's all I need. On my next turn, I use my Breath Weapon attack on the room, and light up the cellar full of gunpowder. Now, in the previous session where Protag had gotten his gunpowder stock, Protag had ruled that each exploding barrel was equal to one fireball spell, which the DM allowed. Realizing now that all of his barrels were lighting up in his face, he tried to rule that they were more akin to alchemist flames. But with me and the other players having a laugh at the whole experience, we forced the DM to stay true to the previous ruling. The DM nervously looked to Protag and agreed, and so the dice began to roll. Now, he collected 50 of these things, which are all base level fireballs essentially. At max, both he and I would be taking a total of 2400 fire damage, and at worst, just 400 fire damage. Even with his magic items that halved spell damage, there was no way he could survive this, especially with us only being level 8. I, on the other hand, being a red dragonborn who had activated my level 5 chromatic warding feature, was outright immune to fire damage. And that was that. The Protag was dead, burnt to a crisp due to about 1,000 or so fire damage. It was of course rolled using a dice app since none of us had that many d6s. I stepped out of the burning hall like a corny action movie hero, and the DM promptly ended the session. For a while, Protag skimmed through his sheet and mine in order to try to find some loopholes, but came out empty-handed. About a week later, the DM messaged our chat and told us he was ending the game. Apparently, he didn't know what to do now since Protag's character was dead. He had written so much of the plot to revolve around him that there was nothing else he could think of. I said we could just retcon the previous session, but he just wanted to end it. And so, I'm without an IRL party again. But if it wasn't for my family also playing there at the table, I would have left many sessions ago. Honestly, blowing him up was the most fun I had in that game outside of the opening. It was a drag, and none of us had signed up to be a pawn in someone else's power fantasy game. I never talked to the guy again, because we never really talked outside of the game in the first place. The chat died, and we all just moved on. I don't know too much about Protag, so I can't in good conscience say he was a complete jerk to the core, but I can say that he was at least a bit too full of himself, and is someone I wouldn't want to game with going forwards. I know this was a long one, but I hope you enjoyed this tangent if you made it this far. Thank you for reading. In summary, a player becomes a chosen one, and power trips the rest of the party into the background. He starts a PvP round with me, so I blow him up with his own stock of gunpowder. The game ends because too much of the plot was written around the now dead protagonist of this D&D game. A small update. I have seen that some of you are curious about the DM, so here's what I can gather about them. As far as I know, they've been a DM before, but I don't know if I would call them inexperienced DM. I think the main issue here was that the DM was a bit of a yes man when it came to their players. I remember someone asking something along the lines of, "So when is Protag's arc going to be done?" And he said something like soon, but yeah, it never really ended. In the end, I think it was just more of a lack of self-confidence to deny any of Protag's wants. I do wish them the best though, since the start was promising. They just needed to develop a backbone when up against aggressive players. And that's where the story ends. Well, that was certainly an explosive ending to the campaign, but it really should not have been the one that happened. Unfortunately, the issues with the protagonist and their descent into the madness of main character syndrome started fairly early on into the campaign, went completely unopposed, and thus resulted in the eventual downfall of the entire game. Ironically, it started with the Paladin's backstory being given dominance over the game, and that evolved into a steady power trip as the Paladin slowly took control away from the rest of the players, including the DM. There was also that furphy where another player got to kill a boss, before the DM caved to the whims of the protag and robbed Stabby of a rightfully earned boss kill through plot armor, essentially punishing the party for something the protag didn't do: work with the party. Which should not have happened without prior communication with the rest of the party. It even got to the point where a protagonist attempted to overrule the previous rulings of the DM, not to mention how they had to be in the spotlight for everything up until the end of the campaign, taking down the already cactus plot with them when they went out with a bang. It makes me wonder just how much sabotage the protagonist was doing in the background against his party. Obviously, the best method to realize that something needs to change in order to prevent this from getting out of hand would have been to recognize the early warning signs that were being waved in front of the entire group. Things like blatant favoritism, self-inserting into other players' backstories, undermining the integrity of the group's position by making sure that they had to depend on the Paladin in order to be given a fair go, and secretive one-on-one sessions being conducted without the rest of the group knowing about it, are just a few of the early warning signs that the protagonist had been given too much control over the game. And on top of that, becoming a king over a nation and reducing the rest of the party to merely being pawns, and you have one of the worst cases of main character syndrome without outright delving into the world of Mary Sue characters. Even in the situation where a point of no return has been passed, there are still solutions to resolve the situation before it goes completely nuclear. A good starting point to a resolution would be sitting down with the DM as a group to have an in-depth discussion about the problems being caused and what can be done to mitigate the issues. Eventually, the protagonist would need to be involved with the discussions to figure out if they are going to do anything to try to correct the problems they have caused, but if they refuse to do so, they might have to be booted from the group for the game. Although, they would probably find that preferable to having their main character blown to smithereens. Additionally, it bears mentioning that writing the plot to revolve around just one character in a party of characters is a recipe for disaster, unless done correctly. Remember, TTRPGs are meant to be played as a group, and if the problem player so badly wanted to be a solo hero, they should have been given a one-on-one campaign instead. Thank you for watching the video. If you like my content and want to see more or wish to support the channel, please hit the subscribe button and maybe leave the video a like. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Also, if you wish to leave a comment but can't think of anything to write, let me know you've reached the end of the video by commenting, "That was an explosive finale." Again, thank you all for watching, and I shall see you all next time.